President Trump is preparing to head to France for the G7 summit tomorrow after a week full of contradictions on gun and the economy. The president is still attacking the Federal Reserve this morning. He tweeted, "The economy is doing really well. The Federal Reserve can easily make it record-setting." Meanwhile, his administration insists it wants to put gun control legislation in place. Yesterday, Attorney General William Barr reiterated the White House's plans to work with Congress to get something done. The details of what can get done are unclear. The president contends that he wants meaningful background checks when it comes to gun legislation and has talked to Democrats about the issue. But he has also spoken with the NRA and is focusing heavily on mental health reform. Yesterday, our Paula Reed asked him if he sees gun control as a public health emergency.
I do. And they die for a lot of other reasons, too. But they do. And as I've said, and I think I've said it very loudly and plainly, and I don't think I've changed positions at all, we're working on background checks. There are things we can do, but we already have very serious background checks. We have strong background checks. We can close up the gaps. We can do things that are very good and things that, frankly, gun owners want to have done. But we also have to remember the gun doesn't pull the trigger, a person does, and we have great mental illness.
Let's bring in Weijia Jiang and Julia Manchester. Weijia is a CBS News White House correspondent, and Julia is a reporter for The Hill. Nice to see you both. Weijia, let's start with you and the gun debate. Why is the president struggling to pick a side?
You know, I think it's because he's very aware of both sides, and that clip that you just played is a great example of the way he's trying to sort of maneuver around this. And, you know, in one breath, he is saying we are working on background checks, something has to be done, right after acknowledging this was a public crisis. On the other hand, he's saying, but the current background checks we have are really strong, almost suggesting that they're adequate. So, you know, he has to react, right, when there are back-to-back shootings and Americans are dying, and, you know, he realizes that he has to address the country. He did that in a teleprompter address and said there has to be urgent and swift action, and he called for that. On the other hand, he has to be careful not to lose the support of his base and from, you know, frankly, the NRA, who he's been talking to. We know that he's been on the phone with its CEO, Wayne LaPierre, to say, reportedly that universal background checks are off the table. So, you know, I think the president is right when he says he hasn't changed positions. The problem is he has never defined his position. And to your question, it's because he wants to leave room for interpretation for both sides so he doesn't back himself into any corner and, you know, have to do something that would upset anybody. At the same time, no action is probably not going to work this time. He's getting so much criticism, and he understands that. So I think he's trying to find something that might appease everybody, and that's just near impossible.
To your point, Weijia, let's talk about the House Judiciary Committee going to be returning early from recess to work on at least 3 gun control bills. But if the president does not push for the legislation, will congressional Republicans have any incentive to work with Democrats? Julie, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Senate Republicans definitely may have some sort of incentive, but they will absolutely be following Mitch McConnell and the lead he takes on this. Remember, there are lots of Senate Republicans, namely Cory Gardner, Tom Tillis, Susan Collins, who are facing very tough reelection campaigns. And we know that they are under pressure, especially for Tillis and Gardner, under pressure from the National Rifle Association. But they're also under pressure for various pro-gun control groups. We know that Moms Demand Action, as well as Every Town for Gun Safety, is targeting these states with ad campaigns and bringing up these senators in those ads. So they're in a very tough position. And I think, you know, you would think that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell realizes that. However, Mitch McConnell is also in a tough position. I mean, he is also up for re-election in Kentucky, which is a very heavily red state. But you're seeing Democrats kind of start to make some sort of kind of inroads there in terms of campaigning. But, you know, we'll really have to see where he goes on this, because he'll definitely be setting the tone for the rest of the Senate. For the House, it's not as big of an issue because we know that gun control legislation will most likely pass because it is controlled by Democrats. But everything, you know, in terms of 2020 and whether gun control legislation gets passed does definitely lie within the Senate. So that's where the pressure point is here.
Let's kind of switch topics here and move on to the economy. Weijia, we saw the president tweet about the Federal Reserve. And then this week, he also flip-flopped on whether to cut payroll taxes. Let's go ahead and listen to this first.
I would love to do something on capital gains. We're talking about that. That's a big deal, goes through Congress. Payroll tax is something that we think about, and a lot of people would like to see that. And that very much affects the workers of our country. I'm not looking at a tax cut now. We don't need it. We have a strong economy. Certainly a payroll tax cut. President Obama did that in order to artificially jack up the economy. President Obama had zero interest rates. I don't have zero interest. I have real interest rates. And despite that, I have a strong economy.
Okay, so we're hearing two things here. Are these signs that the president is panicking about what might happen if the economy starts to point towards a recession, Weijia?
Well, certainly publicly, that will never be something that the president admits. But, the economy, he is very aware, is at the heart of his entire reelection campaign. Sources in the campaign, the first time you ask them, is he worried at all about what might happen? They immediately say, regardless of what the president says that might be controversial, regardless of his other policies that might not make other people happy, they point to the economy as the sole reason why people would vote for him. So, when there's volatility in the market, of course, he quickly wants to respond and adjust, and initially did say he was considering payroll tax cuts and then quickly reversed after some stabilization, because if he were to implement those, it would come with a required acknowledgement that something was bumpy in the economy, and therefore there had to be compensation for that. But we have seen this already with his China plan in tariffs. He's so confident about that and insists that in the end this will be the best for the U.S. economy. But he did delay the latest round of tariffs because he acknowledged that it could hurt American consumers when it comes to holiday shopping. So he has delayed those until the middle of December. So I think panicking might be a little strong, but he's certainly setting up the game board here in case something does happen. And he has pieces in place to take the blame, pieces that are not him. He repeatedly criticizes Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve. You just showed that tweet. That's in addition to many things he said verbally and other tweets, because, if there is the R word, if there is a recession, you can bet that will be the first place he points to for blame.
Interesting take. Yeah, certainly, Weijia. Let's, Julia, shifting gears here. Jewish Democrats are reportedly furious over the president's comments questioning their loyalty. If they vote for Democrats, a remark often considered as anti-Semitic, he is saying that they go against Israel. We now know that the House voted to condemn all hate after Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. What can we expect Congress to do with this kind of response when Congress is back in session?
Well, I think you're definitely going to see some sort of response from House Democrats who have very much called out President Trump for these comments. And you're also hearing a lot of backlash from prominent Jewish Senate Democrats, such as Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. So I think you're going to see some sort of response. But it's just so interesting how the president has repeatedly tried to take control or kind of take advantage of what he sees as a major rift within the Democratic Party, this feeling on the issue of Israel and the fact that, there are lots of Democrats who would, be more maybe pro-peaceful Palestinian rights, whereas other Democrats would be much more pro-Israel and maybe critical of the Palestinian Authority in that regard. So it'll be interesting to see how he further continues down this issue, because he seems to like to take advantage of what is a bit of a divide within the Democratic Party. But what the president doesn't appear to understand is that Jewish Americans who overwhelmingly, according to a number of polls, vote Democratic, aren't voting on the issue of Israel. They're voting on other, issues that most Americans vote on, domestic issues such as health care, the economy, those sort of kitchen table issues. Israel is important to them, but I wouldn't say it's at the top of their list in terms of how they vote. And I think President Trump experiences great popularity among conservative Israelis in Israel, but he doesn't seem to differentiate how Jewish Americans vote and how maybe conservative Israelis feel about this.
Weijia, given all of these mixed messages from the White House just this week alone, is there anything else behind the scenes that could be causing these contradictions? We know that you're there day in, day out. Are you hearing anything?
Well, we know that he has a lot of voices in his ear. So with regard to gun control, for example, his own daughter is serving as a bridge between the White House and Congress. She's making phone calls to people on both sides to really try to find a compromise. In his other ear is his son, Donald Trump Jr., who is a known gun enthusiast. So you can imagine, the arguments that he is presenting to his father. And on top of that, he has a lot of groups talking to him, and he is always cognizant of what his base is thinking. So when he's at the rallies, for example, he really, drums up this enthusiasm for Second Amendment rights. And when he's in front of Democrats, he, puts on the hat that he's willing to work with them. And I think that's the case for every issue that he's tackling. There are so many people, advisors behind the scenes. So he wants to get their input. But Alex, you and I both know that at the end of the day, it is President Trump making these decisions. And oftentimes, aides here and advisors may not even know exactly what he's going to do until he personally announces it on Twitter or, at a gaggle that he has impromptu with reporters. So I think everyone's always on their feet here. They're trying to, make their case, but they acknowledge that he is the one who will be making the decisions.
All right, Weijia, Jiang, and Julia Manchester, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Sure.